Aaron, I don't have time to die. God would kick me right back because South would be like, excuse me, Golden Gates. She didn't finish that PAC report.
Oh, yeah. And Hank, by the way, he'd be calling back because my social media calendar's not filled up through the end of the month. So, nope, you're not dead yet. Yeah, and Lindsay's on call. So
you're going to have to take her back. Somebody's on call. We have a spreadsheet to do. 4 podcasts haven't been recorded. And also, somebody would miss our hot buds. So, somebody would miss the hot fun that we have. So,
there's no time. There's no dying amongst us. There's no time for that.
There's work for that. Yeah. All right, let's go. All right.
Okay, good.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
Joining us now is Lindsey Joyce. Lindsey is a CVOR nurse in St. Louis, Missouri, and she's also a fellow contributor right here on First Case. She writes blogs for us, she helps us with content, and just generally part of the team, but also an expert in all things CVOR. And today's topic is actually a very heavy one, just to warn you, but I think it's one that's very important to talk about and one that does not get enough voice time, enough airtime. And we're asking the question, how do I cope with death in the OR? That's heavy. But it's real. And it's something that, unfortunately, Lindsey, working in the CVOR, has seen more than her fair share of. And so she definitely brings a lot of experience and expertise into this conversation so that we can talk about it, learn more about other people's experiences, and also hopefully find ways that we can implement coping strategies and ways that we can deal with it. But before we just jump off the diving board into sadness and talk about such a heavy topic, Lindsey, why don't you introduce yourself for those of our audience who haven't met you before or heard anything about you?
Okay. So, like Melanie said, I'm Lindsey. I work in the CVOR at a hospital in St. Louis. I've been an OR nurse for 17 years now. I've kind of dabbled in all the specialties, and I did some travel nursing to Dallas and Houston, and have been in the CVOR since 2020. And also, as Melanie said, I am a content creator, educator, blog post writer here at First Case.
Yep, you kind of do a lot for us, but it helps because none of us can be an expert in everything. So it's helpful to have all the different people with all the different expertise. But also one very funny tidbit as you were talking, I was thinking about the differences in all three of us and all of our favorite specialties, because, you work in CVOR and I know I would never want to work in that specialty, but I love ortho. Ortho is where I want to be. I always want to work in ortho. Do not put me in GYN for anything because I don't want to be there, which is really funny to me because you, Lindsey, if you're not working in CVOR or in your past, lives, you've worked in other specialties, where is it that you've worked?
I actually started out in GYN surgery.
Yeah, you can take the GYN cases. I'll take the ortho cases. But Chris, you're kind of a different specialty ball too.
I'm a weirdo. Yeah. No, I did trauma. I did CVOR a little bit more in like IR. But I did transplants. So between trauma and transplant
you like
surgery,
stress.
I do. Yeah, I work really well under pressure. And when I'm not under pressure, I can't put sentences
You go to
together.
sleep. So don't ever put you in a long plastics case, right?
No. And get this, I was low man on the totem pole at the trauma center. Like I was like the young kid for a while. And when the lady who did eyes retired, they said, hey, Chris, on Tuesdays, you're going to go do eyes. So I went from big bellies, like pupils circling the drain, like all action all day, to Tuesdays sitting doing phacos. And I was like, what? Yeah. So it made me a really good educator though, because I can teach a vitrectomy, a phaco, sterile, like I got you. But back then you told my 20-year-old self that was what was going to happen. I was not happy. So,
Oh man, that's painful. But
yeah.
it's actually, it's fun to just kind of see what the different expertise that we bring to the table, but also the different things we're interested in. And that's the beauty of the OR, right? I mean, if you don't like one specialty, you can go do something else. Doesn't mean you won't ever get stuck in the eye cases or the ENT cases or the cases you don't want to do. But overall, we do have the luxury a lot of the times of getting to kind of specialize a little bit, which is fun. But despite the fun part that we all love about the OR, as I bring this conversation back down to sadness level, it is very important that we talk about the underside of perioperative care. That the stuff that we like to stuff in a closet, not talk about, hide away from, don't want to bring up. And yet death is a reality that we see in the operating room. Thankfully, not often. It's not a consistently regular occurrence, but it does happen. And so I think just because it's something that happens and it's something that we will encounter at one time or another in our career, then it's something we should talk about. But Linz, since we're actually interviewing you and not just letting me run around with my opinions all day behind the microphone, why do you think this topic is so important? And why do you think it's important that we talk about our bad experiences?
Okay, so death is not fun at all. Obviously, it's one of the most taboo topics that there is in human interaction, and death in the OR is even more unfun. I think there's this idea out there that death in the OR shouldn't ever happen because of all the tools and the resources like we have at our hands. Like, if you come in with a gunshot wound to the abdomen, we can go in and we can cut you up and we can get straight to, wherever that bullet might be. Like, oh, you're actually seeing the wound or the injury or whatever. Like, we should be able to hands-on fix it right then and there. But that's not always the case. Obviously, we can have all the equipment and technology at our disposal, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think there's another misconception that where you work means I'm never going to see death happen. If you work at an ambulatory surgery center, or if you work at say a specialty clinic, say if there's a place that just does outpatient eye surgery, for example. I've heard so many nurses and scrubs say I don't have to worry about that. That's never going to happen in my OR, but it can. It can. You can have the most healthiest patient on your table, and you don't know what kind of reaction they're going to have to anesthesia or medications or local, or, not to say that people aren't truthful, but, maybe people aren't fully
truthful.
Fully forthcoming
with their medical history and whatnot. So, they might be hiding the fact that, maybe they partake in some behaviors.
Recreational drug use.
Yes, that's a great example. And, things happen. So it's difficult. You're seeing the end of someone's life pretty much, before you. And again, it's not fun. It's very difficult. Life is sacred. It's beautiful, something to be cherished. And when you see this taken away, whether usually in the OR settings, I feel the deaths that you see are pretty, acute. You don't have somebody obviously who's on hospice coming down and having surgery. Hopefully not, but usually you're seeing trauma, some kind of injury. So you see that being taken away from you in front of you can be very jarring.
I think in talking about how precious life is and how jarring, those are great adjectives to use. But Lindsey, what was your first memory? I think we all can remember the first time we experienced an OR death, but can you tell us about your first memory of that?
Yeah, so I think I was within my first year of being an OR nurse, and I was working overnight. I think I had picked up a night shift for some reason. I was working at a trauma center at a time, so 24-hour staffing, and we had a car accident come in, and major orthopedic injuries, major abdominal injuries, head injuries, to say the least. So rushed them obviously from ER to OR, and I am still very grateful to this day for the charge nurse that was there that night with me, who she taught me so much and, picked up the pieces when I walked in and just kind of froze. during nursing school, I worked in the ICU. So I had some experience with death there as a tech, but it was very different, not only as a nurse, but in this setting, like seeing this person come in the way that they were. And you just kind of followed her command at that point and said, do this. And obviously this person succumbed from their injuries. And it was almost in like this huge adrenaline, gotta go to this just somber, the physicians all leave the room, and now it's up to the nurses and the scrub to deal with the aftermath, so to speak. So you go from this one high energy feeling of adrenaline rush to this kind of, wow, like you almost feel like a failure, even though it's really not, you didn't fail this patient, you didn't fail yourself, but there is that sense of failure when you do have a death.
Well, I can appreciate that feeling because in the OR, we fix people. You leave better than you came in. That's what we do. And we don't ever get to see the follow-up long-term from our patients, but we do have that personal satisfaction of they came in one way and they left. They left and they left better, or at least they left in an improved situation than what they were in. And when a patient comes into our OR and then they pass on the table, suddenly we're left like, but that's not what we're supposed to do. That's not what's supposed to happen.
So we learn, obviously, in nursing school, and I'm sure, Chris, you teach this to your students, that, that there's comfort, you learn about comfort care on the floor, patients' final days, holding their hand and providing a safe environment and family. And you don't have that in the OR. If someone passes, this person has passed with strangers at the bedside. It's usually a very chaotic situation. There's no bedside care, essentially, when there is death in the OR.
No, and half the people that are in the room, they didn't even know we're going to be in there. And sometimes, especially in a trauma, like their family didn't even know that they were where, even, like the location that they were. And so there is a finality and a shock to the people in your OR, and you seeing the people. I remember not just having that finality for me, but having and seeing the shock for the family, because we were on call and we had a death in the operating room, and we finally were able to clear out of the room, and someone stayed with the patient, and I went and ran to the cafeteria before it closed just to get snacks. Like, we were all starving. I'm just going to grab a whole bunch of food and bring it back. And I was walking past that family because there was an officer talking to them, and just seeing that and knowing that I had witnessed what had happened, but I can't say anything, it's not my place. And just having that sink in. And as a surgical tech, we don't get to interact with the family like you all do on the nursing side. And I just remember that kind of searing into my memory profoundly, because we're a little insulated from those interactions in a way that you all unfortunately aren't sometimes.
No, you bring up a good point. Yeah, the perspective is different, for all of us. Lindsey, you talked about, this first experience, which is definitely one to live with, right? And I think it answers the question, do you ever forget it? No, we all still think about it, right? They stay with us, and they shape our practice, and they shape our perspective. But I am curious, you talked about in this particular case, and maybe in other cases that you've dealt with too, there's the high adrenaline. There's the trying to save the patient, and then there's the unfortunate reality that the patient couldn't be saved. And now we switch from perioperative care to postmortem care. And then somehow we have to switch gears. We have to do the things that have to be done. Oh, and then by the way, if it's not night shift and it's the only case, oh, hey, might be another case coming into my room and I have to shift gears again. How do you handle that whole experience of the mental shift, the mental load and responsibility of something so heavy?
So the first thing I want to say and stress very importantly is there's no wrong way to deal with this. Okay. I can't judge how you're going to deal with grief or a situation. Chris might handle it differently than you would handle it versus I would handle it. So the first thing is there's no wrong way how you deal with it. I can kind of just give you examples from my personal experience. So I used to do trauma before I did CVOR. So we did, unfortunately, get our share of intraoperative deaths. For me personally, it's just like my mind shifts. It's like, okay, I've gone from this terrible thing and I don't know how to react to, oh, I got to be a taskmaster now. Like, I'm all about like, I need to get 1, 2, 3. I need to get it all done. Let me get it done. And I feel like that kind of, for me, if I delay the processing of feelings, that maybe I can fully process it later on. So that being said, there are processes to deal with after. I think I'm going to talk about like the nursing process and then the grief process later. So again, I'm speaking from experience from policies at my own facility. Highly encourage everybody to look at the postmortem care and policies at your facilities. But typically, if there's intraoperative deaths, they usually become medical examiner cases for some of the reasons we said earlier, that, you know, you have these resources and you have the technology at your hand and you couldn't save this person. Sometimes these patients have been part of a crime. So now the body has to be undisturbed as much as possible for evidence and collection of samples and blood and tissue and everything. So many times it sounds really inhumane to say, you just have to let the body be at first. And when the medical examiner says, yes, we want the body, you would label the patient. Usually that weird scene you see in the horror where they're putting the toe tag on, that's real life. You truly do put a tag on the toe with a patient sticker or identification. Place them in the bag with everything in them. Tubes, lines, catheters. If it's in the patient, it stays.
That was the hardest thing for me. The first time that I had to address the care of the patient afterwards. And nobody wanted to go back in the room and, you know, there's this patient's body in the room. Nobody wanted to do it. And I had been assisting with the code during the, you know, while we were trying to save this patient. And afterwards I was like, okay, I'll go put them in the bag and do all this stuff. But I wasn't that familiar with the processes and the steps and everything we needed to do. And somebody was telling me that everything that's in them stays in them. Don't take anything out. And I don't know, maybe it's just my natural tendency. You want to clean them all up, right? You want to make them look nice and pretty and put them in there nice and comfortable, even though you know that you know what you know, but still you still want to, you know, make them look nice, make them everything good. And so to not touch any of that was really hard. And even being handed the body bag and being told, go put the patient in this. And I'm like, I've never done that before. And then, you know, trying to, you know, there's all these tubes, all the IVs and all this other stuff. And then, you know, I'm putting the patient in the body bag and I'm looking at them going, are they breathing? Are you sure they're not breathing? I think they're breathing. Wait, no, they're not breathing. You know, and that doubt and those questions and just the surreal nature of the experience. But yeah, that is a really good nugget to take away, that you leave what's in them, and it all goes. And that's a hard one for us to, I think, to really remember, especially when we don't do it all the time. But yeah, you can keep going now. I just needed to add my 2 cents there.
Nope. So sometimes the medical examiner, you know, will say, nope, we don't need an autopsy from there. So you can kind of then proceed what's your hospital policy. Now keep in mind that just because a medical examiner says that they don't need to do an autopsy for whatever reason, the families still do have that ability to request their own personal autopsy, either to be done at the hospital or, you know, on their own arrangements. If that's the case, I've never had that personally where the family has asked for it, but I have talked to medical examiners before who say that you still kind of just leave everything as is. ME doesn't need it, family doesn't want it, then you get into that postmortem care, like you said. And then this is where sometimes I do take that extra 10, 15 minutes to clean them up. You know, I'll pour some water over their hair and clean them up. I'll wash off the blood. You know, I'm the one that puts fresh sheets under the body to put it in the bag. Personally.
Well, it's thoughtful. It's considerate. It's respect for the dead. I mean, I think it's basic nursing care, no matter what patient you might be dealing with. And you
still have to remember, regardless, this is somebody's family member.
Exactly.
Okay? You want to treat, we say to all the time to people in the OR, treat them the way you'd want your family member on that table. And this is no exception as well. So postmortem care. Again, this can look different from facility to facility, but usually then this is when you can take those lines and tubes out that's not needed. We've had funeral homes tell us that, if something's real difficult, don't worry about it. They'll take care of it at the funeral home. And then you usually will have to escort the body down to the morgue at your hospital, which is usually, that kind of can vary as well. Sometimes it's in the pathology, sometimes it's in like the lab. I know at our facility, it has to be escorted with a security guard. Security's in. So the nurse and the security guard do have to go down. We have to, sign the patient in with all their paperwork and whatnot. And then, of course, there's the never-ending charting. You have to do, there's charting of the death. There's charting of the expiration checklist. At my facility, I don't have to discharge the patient from the hospital. That comes from another department. But then after all,
wait, I didn't even think of that. I didn't even think about that.
Duh.
I mean, also, I don't think about charting because that's why I'm a surge tech. Thank you very much. Yes. But I didn't even think, yeah, they definitely left against medical.
Yeah.
There's check that box. Sorry.
Yeah.
Medical, awful OR humor. But now that's, sorry, mind blown. I didn't even.
Yep.
Not to interrupt that one, but yeah. So, there's the processes of dealing with the action that happened in the OR. And there's some catharticism for doing that because you take your mind away from the event that just happened, But there are also, I think, those deaths that are planned in the OR. Like when we have retrievals and, we have brain deaths. And I think I came from a labor and delivery background as well. And we had fetal demise that we knew were happening. We had sections that we had to do for babies that had passed in utero. And so sometimes you even know it's coming and it doesn't make it any easier, But after, whether the death's planned or not planned, and once you've gotten through those processes, like, does your team as a whole do a kind of post huddle, if you will? Is that, I know I've had some departments that were really good about doing kind of like a post code, right? I've had some that were not very good at checking in on each other. Like, in your experience, what has that been like? Or have you been the person to take charge in moments like that?
So we've done it in two ways. Most recently, we had a death in our OR a couple weeks ago, and it was one of those, everybody in the room, multiple surgeons in the room, and it just, we lost our efforts essentially. This was our surgeon's first death since his training almost 8 or 9 years ago. And it's okay. Men can cry. We saw this man crying, and I think he got caught by us. And I think he just tried to, then this be that stoic, no, I don't have feelings. And then it was a very just stunned kind of situation in the room. I don't want to make it sound like I'm the expert in OR death, but I was one of 3 people out of 15 in that room who had ever had experienced an intraoperative death. So I think there was this just stunned of people just didn't know what to do in general. They didn't know, should I talk? Do I have to be quiet? Like, can I ask questions? So, and that happened on Friday afternoon. So it gave people time to go home and kind of think about things. And then we did have a little, on our Monday morning, we did kind of come back together and be like, our, boss gave us an extra 10 or 15 minutes and said, if anyone just needs to talk and say it out loud now. He says, like, if you don't feel like doing it right now, you don't have to. If you want to talk to us later, if you want to, So I have in that situation, I have, Chris, like you said, I've done my share of organ procurements as well. It's usually just me and the procurement team. Rarely it's kind of been any other people in the OR, but sometimes we've had some new people who've wanted to come in and learn and whatnot. And then usually for them, with them, I kind of do this like little one-on-one. Usually we're having to wait for security to come up and so we can just go down to the morgue together. So that usually gives us a little bit of time to talk about it and talk questions. I just tell them, they'll say, people will say, I have a dumb question. No, there's no such dumb question when it comes to something you've never experienced before. I've answered the same questions with new people time and time again. It's okay. So sometimes a little one-on-one works as well.
Sometimes you don't even know what you need to process. Sometimes you got to go home and just be for a minute and then come back and talk it through. I don't know. Melanie, how did you handle it when you've been
Well,
in that
having this conversation is actually making me relive several different, patient deaths and experiences, which ultimately it's not a bad thing. I think it is helpful to remember what we've gone through, remember what we've experienced, because it does help influence the inevitable next time that it happens again, right? And there are lessons to be learned from each of the different experiences. But grief and the grief process is different for each of us. Yeah, there's the stages of grief that we talk about in nursing school, and those are very important. But how we interact with those stages and how that looks like when you don't even realize that maybe you're dealing with grief when it was your patient who passed, because you're not their family member. This isn't your loved one necessarily, but it was your patient. And so it strikes at the heart of what we do in healthcare, right? We make people better, like I said earlier. And so there is a grieving process that we have to work through. And I think, Lindsey, you were going to talk a little bit about the grieving process or the stages of grief, but I think it's important to think about that and to think about how that could influence how we process and how we have a healthy respect and approach to dealing with these unfortunate, inevitable, unfortunate or even planned situations that still just hit us like a ton of bricks when we have to experience them. Lindsey, I'll let you take over from there as far as dealing with grief, but I think it's an important part of this conversation.
Oh, for sure. And like I said earlier, there's no wrong way to deal with death and grief. We're all going to experience it, and we could all experience the same type of death, but we're all going to cope with it different ways. Some people will cry, some will be silent. We might do a combination of both. I certainly have. It's okay to bottle feelings up, but I would really implore you not to do this for very long, because then that's going to lead till mal coping mechanisms, usually at home. You've heard of those stories where you keep it up, bottled up, and then, somebody's exploding on their spouse at home. So however you deal with sadness and grief, that's what I recommend. Maybe you have a personal belief, maybe you have specific religious beliefs or prayers, or somebody, a person that you can turn to, and you can go sit in a sacred space, a church, a sanctuary, or, maybe you have your own kind of Zen place at home. You could do that.
Even the chapel at your facility, because most facilities have a chapel or a religious type space. It's just quiet.
I'm glad you brought that up too. Is the chaplain services at the hospital? They're not just for family and friends. They can be there for coworkers as well. So maybe you rely on that. Maybe you process emotions by journaling or meditating. Maybe you're that person that's got to write it out. Maybe you like to just be left alone with your thoughts. I can tell you a lot of times what I've always done is just, if it's obviously like during the day and I come home, not in the middle of the night, but I like to get up and just go for a long walk. Let me just put on my AirPods and listen to a podcast and get lost in a story. And let me get into that story and just kind of forget. There's always, if you watched Grey's Anatomy, Christina would always say that Meredith was her person, Chris,
you gotta have your person.
You gotta have your person. You can hate that you can hate the show, you can hate all you want, but you gotta have your person to go to, I love my parents dearly, don't get me wrong. I can't talk about this with them at work, or major issues that happened at work.
Aw, shout out to Mama. I love your mom.
Your mom is great. We've had the luxury of meeting Lindsey's mom several times, so it's really cool to get to meet her. But I can also appreciate
our conference mom.
Yeah, I can appreciate the difficulty of talking to somebody about the heaviness of this when it's your parents, maybe, or somebody who's maybe outside of the healthcare world.
I can tell Mama something's happened, and she can tell that I'm just going to leave you alone and not bother you. But I have some, you have some nursing buddies, like know I could totally text Melanie and Chris about any time about
absolutely
to vent about a situation. One of my best friends is in healthcare, not in the nursing or medical, but he's a pharmacist, and like I know I can dump all this on him and he'll understand. And they know that I can just sit there and vent and either say something or just be silent. But you got to have your person, whoever it is. We talked about the hospital chaplain. I would check with your employer. Many hospitals have employee assistant programs. These events can be very triggering for people, especially if they've never experienced it before. So our EAP program, offers like 6 therapy sessions for free about any issue that you might be having. So I do know that there was one of my coworkers who had never experienced any kind of death in his career. He reached out and went and met with him one day, just like, I don't know how I'm supposed to do it. So after this death occurred, and then Chris, like we kind of discussed it already, but debrief with the team. Anybody on a team can ask for a debrief. Not everybody has to participate in it. If there's somebody who doesn't want to, I would say don't force somebody. You're gonna.
It's so hard because like I want to ask you about final thoughts. We always give. You know how we fly. Like we always give our guests the opportunity to have the last word and what you want to leave our listeners with. And you've given us so much to think about already. And that's such great advice that I think like the main word you've given is deal, right? Like just don't pack it away. But I don't know. How would you like to wrap this in a very sad bow? But,
wrap it in a sad bow, but what do you want?
What's the takeaway? It's a heavy topic, obviously. I can speak on it, unfortunately, because I've had many experiences with it. But all those experiences have helped me move forward and have helped me help others who have not experienced it before. 17 years ago when I experienced my first aura death and I was asking all the questions, people today who have never experienced it, they're asking the same questions I asked 17 years ago. So I like to think about that nurse who was my mentor then and being that mentor for the person now. So it's not something we want to think about, obviously, in any capacity, but in nursing, we have to think about it. And death applies to the OR. It's not just something that happens on the floor, it happens in the ICU. So advocate for yourself so you can be prepared to take care of that next patient, whether it's the next case, the next day, the next week.
Absolutely. Lindsey, that is excellent advice. It's unfortunate that your experiences have led you to the place where you can provide such good advice. But at the same time, like you said, it is helpful for us who have worked and lived through these experiences to be able to pass on what we've learned and help pass on something positive from something so negative so that other people following in our footsteps can also cope with the inevitable. So I definitely want to take a minute to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences. You're an excellent guest. Actually, it's just nice to have you in the studio and to be part of our team again. But also, it's just good to have you talk about your experiences because we learn so much when we can connect to somebody's experience. So thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Well, so to all of you listening, yes, this has been a heavy topic, and it is one that I don't think we should avoid, even though I think we want to close the door and close the blinds and whisper and not talk about it because it is hard and heavy. But there's value in these conversations. And so take away from this conversation that, yes, when we experience death in the OR, it's heavy and it's hard and it hits us hard and we have to cope with it. We have to deal with it. And when we look at that question, how do I cope with death in the OR? Take this advice to heart. Don't bottle it up for too long. You might not want to talk about it immediately, but don't bottle it up for too long. Take advantage of the resources that your facility offers you for counseling, for therapy, for any ways that you can work through your feelings. And then also, make sure you know what your facility's policy is when it comes to postmortem care of your patient. Because when the inevitable happens, that's not the time to be fiddling around looking for that policy because you don't know what to do. So educate yourself now when it's not an emergency and we're not sad. And then make sure when it happens, you're aware, but then also advocate for what you need so that you can process these things. So that is going to do it for this week's episode. On behalf of Chris, Lindsey, and myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to this week's episode of First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.